Back in 2016, Stranger Things began as a quiet, nostalgic mystery about missing kids, flickering lights, and a girl with a shaved head. Nearly 10 years later, that story has officially come to an end, and the finale leaves us with more questions than answers. There's a lot to unpack here, from the shocking return of the Mind Flayer, to a character death that felt strangely muted, to a possible second death depending on how you read the ending, and even a 45-minute epilogue that arguably overstayed its welcome. But above all else, one moment stands out: the final story Mike tells. What did it really mean? Let's break it all down and answer the biggest questions surrounding the finale. This is the Stranger Things Season 5 ending explained. And yes, full spoilers ahead. Did Eleven actually die? That's the question that's been dividing fans since the credits rolled. And honestly, the show very clearly wants you to think she did before pulling back at the very last second. In what might be the Duffers' boldest or laziest move yet, they leave the final answer entirely up to interpretation. By the end of the battle, the group succeeds in killing both Vecna and the Mind Flayer, revealed to be fully connected through the hive mind. But the twist is that the Mind Flayer wasn't using Henry as a vessel at all. It needed him. With that connection severed, the group escapes the abyss and sets off the bomb using the exotic matter, triggering the destruction of the Upside Down itself. Everyone makes it back to the right side up, except Eleven. She's left standing alone by the gate, hesitating. And we learn why. Kylie explains, Eleven understands that there will always be more people like Dr. Brenner and Dr. K. People willing to hurt those she loves just to get to her, just to create more numbers. So instead of crossing over, Eleven chooses to stay behind as the Upside Down collapses. A moment that feels final, tragic, and absolute. Everything about it tells us this is the end. But then the finale jumps forward 18 months, and suddenly Mike tells a different version of events during a Dungeons & Dragons session. In his story, the mage representing Eleven didn't die at all. She tricked everyone using Carly's powers, making it appear as though she was lost with the Upside Down, when in reality she escaped and found peace somewhere far away. Paradise. A quiet ending, and this isn't just random narration. It directly ties back to Hopper's earlier speech about the two paths Mike could take in life. One where he blames himself forever for Eleven's death, and one where he accepts her choice and keeps going. This final story feels less like a reveal and more like a coping mechanism. A storyteller offering a version of events that allows the characters and the audience to find peace. But personally, I don't buy it. In my view, Kaylee was already dead long before Eleven ever reached the gate, and certainly before she entered the abyss. The timeline simply doesn't add up. For me, Eleven did die, and thematically that makes sense. Eleven's paradise was never some distant, peaceful land. It was the people she loved. Her entire life was defined by suffering, isolation, and exploitation until she found Hopper, Mike, and her friends. That was her happy ending. To remove her from that, to say she lived somewhere else without them, undermines the very heart of the show. When you look at the sequence of events, there's just no realistic way she survives. So yes, I believe Eleven truly died, and Stranger Things ended exactly the way it began. Bittersweet, tragic, and unforgettable. When it comes to Vecna's final moments, the finale finally answers a long-standing mystery: why he could never fully enter the cave. The reason? The Mind Flayer itself was holding him back. It was never fear or hesitation, it was control. And when Vecna forces himself back into the memory of his first encounter with the darkness, we see him relive the moment that changed everything. But here's where my biggest concern becomes reality. That scene of Henry opening the case and embracing the darkness felt less like a revelation and more like an advertisement. It didn't deepen his character nearly as much as it teased the first Shadow stage play. We got the look though, at the cold, hollow stare that made him terrifying in season 4, but not the depth that earned it. Style over substance. While Will is psychically connected to Vecna through the hive mind, he tries to reach him, insisting that Henry was once just a vessel, used, manipulated, controlled. But Vecna pushes back, claiming the Mind Flayer needed him. I don't believe that for a second. To me, that line exposes Henry's weakness, not his power. It's the same warning the scientists gave him in the cave: resist it or it will consume you and everything else. Then comes the reveal. Vecna's lair isn't just a hideout, it's the dormant shell of the Mind Flayer itself. And once it awakens, the final battle spills into the abyss. Vecna is physically tethered to the creature, positioned directly beneath its core, its heart, as 11 confronts him face to face and Will interferes from within the hive mind. Vecna is ultimately impaled by a spike driven into the very center of the Mind Flayer. And honestly, it felt easy. Every major confrontation with Vecna in season 4 carried more weight, more dread, more intensity than this final showdown. He was taken out quickly, almost unceremoniously, and the same goes for the Mind Flayer. For an entity that haunted this show since the beginning, an unknowable, shadowy force, it felt strangely neutered once it had a physical form. When it opened its mouth, sure, it looked incredible, but it never felt dangerous. At no point did it feel like any of them were truly at risk. In the end, it's Joyce who delivers the final blow, telling Vecna he picked the wrong family. As she attacks him, we see flashes of his cruelty, his victims, his legacy of pain, and just like that, he's gone. The heart of the Mind Flayer darkens, the nightmare ends, but I'm torn on that moment. Joyce barely featured in the finale, yet she's handed one of the most defining kills in the entire series. I'm not sure it was earned. The epilogue gives us a snapshot of the future. Hopper and Joyce are engaged, preparing to move away so Hopper can take a new job. Will leaves Hawkins and finally finds a place where he feels free to be himself. Mike becomes a writer. Dustin keeps learning, still chasing curiosity, but never giving up adventure. Lucas and Max end up together, building a quiet life. Steve becomes a baseball coach. Jonathan continues making films. Robin works at the radio station. Nancy leaves Emerson behind and takes a job at the Herald. And despite their separate paths, they promise to meet once a month. Because some bonds don't fade, they evolve. We also see the next generation. Holly and her friends now sit in the basement rolling dice, opening books, chasing imaginary dragons. The torch has been passed. The binders are closed. The game is over. This finale is a mixed bag. There are moments I genuinely loved and moments that just didn't land. The episode feels choppy, uneven, and rushed. The CGI falters at times, and it robs Vecna and the Mind Flayer of the fear they once commanded. These were the forces that started everything. The darkness that shaped Henry, the evil that defined the show, and they're gone almost too easily. Once they're defeated, there's still so much runtime left that it feels like something else should happen, but nothing does. And that's where the disappointment sets in. Vecna was far more terrifying in season 4, and even in season 5 volume 1, than he ever was here. The finale lacked emotional weight. 11 felt in control from the very beginning, even though this was supposedly the Mind Flayer's domain. If anything, Vecna should have been stronger than ever. As for the deaths, 11's is left frustratingly ambiguous. That indecision weakens the impact. Callie's death barely registered emotionally and felt more like narrative housekeeping than tragedy. Steve's fake-out death atop the tower was another tease that went nowhere, saved at the last second by Jonathan in a moment that felt more convenient than earned. There was simply too much story left to tell with only 2 hours remaining. We spent so much time with Holly Wheeler and the reveal of Will's powers, yet neither truly mattered in the end. Will never even confronts Vecna face to face. Yes, he outmatches him mentally, but it lacked punch. For a finale where the world was at stake, it rarely felt that way. The final 45 minutes drag, leaning heavily into 1980s movie cliches. And honestly, this is where the cracks show. Some performances falter, particularly Finn Wolfhard in his final scenes with 11. It highlighted something bittersweet. This show was at its strongest when the cast was younger. The flashbacks made that impossible to ignore, and yet there were moments that worked. Hopper and 11's bond still hit hard. Learning more about Henry and the Mind Flayer reignited that original sense of mystery. For brief moments, it felt like Stranger Things again. Overall, the show ends. Okay, season 4 remains the high point. If the gap between seasons hadn't been so long, I truly believe we could have gotten a darker, more terrifying finale. One that matched what this series was built on. Once upon a time, Vecna was terrifying. The Mind Flayer was unknowable. Hawkins felt unsafe, and every roll of the dice felt like it mattered. By the end, we always knew the party would win. And maybe that's the real ending. Not fear, but nostalgia. When the dust settles and we look back on Stranger Things as a whole, I think history will be kind to it. This wasn't a Game of Thrones level collapse. The finale didn't destroy the legacy. It just didn't quite reach the heights the story or the fans were ready for. The heart was there. The time Wasn't. This ending needed more room to breathe. The abyss, the return of the Mind Flayer, and the final clash between Eleven and Vecna all felt like ideas that deserved an entire volume of their own, not a hurried sprint through the last 20 minutes of a 2-hour episode. And that's the crazy part. Somehow, an episode that ran over 2 hours still felt rushed. Honestly, cut the epilogue in half, or cut it entirely. Those 45 minutes could have been spent where it mattered most. Inside the darkness, inside the horror, inside the final battle that this show had been building toward since the moment Will Byers disappeared in 2016. Writing an ending is never easy. Television history is filled with shows that stumbled at the finish line, and while Stranger Things didn't stick the landing perfectly, it didn't trip either. It crossed the line, just not at full speed. So in the end, the Stranger Things finale wasn't bad. It wasn't legendary. It was fine. And maybe that's the strangest part of all. A show that once made us afraid of the dark, afraid of clocks, afraid of what lived just beyond the walls, ended quietly, nostalgically, looking backward instead of forward. And maybe that's fitting. Because Stranger Things was never just about monsters. It was about bikes at sunset, walkie-talkies crackling to life, dice rolling on basement tables, friendships that felt unbreakable, and a decade later, that's what we'll remember most. So there you have it. Stranger Things, Season 5, The Ending Explained.